And we are live. This is another one of our Women's Voices event glimpse, and I'm today delighted to be joined by Fiona Vera-Gray, who is Professor. I told you I'd slip over my professor bit, didn't I? Professor Fiona Vera-Gray. There we go. I got it right this time. I'm so delighted to have you here. Now, you are the author of The Right Amount of Panic, and also the second book I know is the more recent one, isn't it? Or is it have I got it the other way around?
Yeah, no. So I've authored 2 books on public sexual harassment. One's called Men's Intrusion, Women's Embodiment. That's a more academic book. Then there's The Right Amount of Panic, which is a more general fiction, well, not general fiction, general non-fiction, general audience kind of book.
Yeah.
Then my most recent book was about women's relationships to pornography,
which I came and heard you talk with Jill Ruddock at the Tunbridge Wells Literary Festival. It was absolutely fascinating. But, you know, I'm absolutely delighted that you're joining us on the Women's Voices Day in November. And, you know, for me, it's that whole thing of, and you talk a lot about freedom. So, and this sort of idea of what is the right amount of panic. And your research sort of kind of shows women, you know, develop lots and lots of, you know, countless strategies without really even noticing it. And, you know, what are some of the things that you've kind of uncovered through the research that you've done?
Yeah, so I talk about it in terms of safety work, which is the daily habitual strategies, activities, things that women and girls do in order to prevent or manage or minimize the experiences of sexual harassment in public. And there's so many. So where the idea really came from was in the research. I set out to talk to 50 women about their experiences of sexual harassment in public. And we had an interview, and then I asked them to complete a notebook for about 2 weeks. Sometimes it went further into a couple of months. And then we met again in a second interview to discuss what they found, you know, whether they'd experienced kind of what they thought. And what I found was that actually they experienced much less harassment when they were recording it than they thought they would at the first interview. And the reason for that was that also they had significantly underestimated the amount of safety work that they were doing to prevent or avoid. Or so, you know, in first interviews, women were saying, I don't really do much, you know, I feel quite free, I go out and do whatever I want in the world. But then actually when they were noticing what they were doing things like not going out at particular times, you know, obviously after dark and things like that, or going out with particular people, through to choosing what kinds of clothes to wear, doing things like making sure that they're walking down the street with this weird kind of perfect expression that has to be not smiley and invitational because you don't want to invite it, but you also don't want to look mean. You don't want someone to end up saying to you, you know, cheer up, love, or smile. So trying to do some kind of managed face expression. And basically what I found was that women and girls, young women, were doing a whole range of things that were about really ultimately them feeling in some way responsible for preventing not just sexual harassment, but all forms of sexual violence and sexual intrusion in public.
And you're right. I think it's become so subconscious, isn't it? You know, it's that whole thing of it's just the process I go through. I didn't realize it was, you know, actually it's so ingrained in us that we don't think about it. But actually when you consciously are getting people to acknowledge what they're doing, you know, you go, yeah, there is an awful lot. And actually, you know, in what you were saying, I mean, I remember doing some walks and talks with the local police force here and listening to what the girls here were doing. And that, you know, and it was, I was quite astounded personally at how much work was being done to, you know, when they were going out for an evening, for example, you know, all the work that they would go before they'd even left the house. And so it was a real eye-opener, and you know, I can totally, you know, understand the safety work that you talk of, and it's almost subliminal in some respects. But I mean, do you think there's a sense of shame with that, with us doing that? What do you think of this sort of kind of the sense? Do you think it's just we have taken that responsibility on and we just take it for granted that we do? What do you think really is? Is it purely because we don't want to get the harassment? I'm curious your thoughts for it.
I mean, there's a lot of social messages that girls get. So what I found was that when girls were very young, and sometimes very young, so some of the women that I interviewed would talk about remembering being wolf whistled at when they were 7, 8, having men yell things out of cars when they were, I don't know, 11, 12. Like, these are young girls.
Yeah.
And that when that would happen to them, and now obviously girls experiencing stuff online, so you have to think about that as a new public space, experiencing a whole bunch of intrusions online. And when that happens, that they would turn to generally the women around them, older sisters, mums, aunties, that kind of thing, and be like, what was that? Like, why'd that guy just yell something at me? And the response generally, and it came from a good place, was kind of like, oh God, yeah, it sucks. It's just part of what it's going to be like in the world, and you're going to need to learn to manage it. So girls will get that sometimes a very explicit, direct message that this is something that is in the world. You cannot change it. Some men are going to feel that they can comment on you, talk to you.
Yeah.
It is going to be your responsibility to be able to manage that in some way, to either learn to be okay with it, or if you're not okay with it, you're going to have to learn strategies to prevent it. And so you get that message very, very early on, coming from a good place. This is coming from sisters who are like, oh God, I really don't want that to happen to you. So let's decide next time to not go down that street or to not do this or blah, blah. But the message is very individualized. So instead of talking to girls, and this is what I get asked a lot, what do I say to my young girl? This has happened. And instead of, what you need to do is help them have an understanding that this isn't about their individual behavior. For all of us, this isn't about our individual behavior. It's because we live in a social context that encourages men to demonstrate their masculinity on the bodies of other women in lots of different ways. This is also the connections that I make to pornography. And so what you want to be doing with young people is having them understand that this isn't an individual action. It isn't individual. It's not because of you. It's not because of something that you did. But they don't get that message. And then over time that builds, and so we get it less now, but we used to very much around Christmas time. Different police forces, for example, would always put out prevention campaigns that were focused on drinking, nighttime economy, and rape and sexual violence. And when you actually look at those campaigns, the vast majority of them are focused on women changing their behavior. So don't leave your drink unattended, don't leave your friend's drink unattended, don't go home with a man you don't know, don't catch a minicab. Don't do all of these things. And so it's like we have this message when we're young saying, this is your fault, you need to stop it. And then we get a message from some of the institutions that are around us saying, you need to be responsible.
So just reinforcing that whole message.
Just reinforces it. We just take it in. And then, if something does happen to us, it's harder for us to talk about because we're told, well, you should have been doing X, Y, and Z to stop that from happening to you. And this is what I mean by the right amount of panic, because when women actually do talk about their safety work, and we did see this after the murder of Sarah Everard, we saw women start to actually talk about all of the things that they do. And pretty quickly, women got told that they're being hysterical, paranoid. This doesn't happen all the time. What are you guys talking about? You're, calm down there. And so it's like we've got to find, in the same way as I was talking about the facial expression, you've got to find the perfect balance between panicking enough that something doesn't happen, but not so much that you're paranoid or hysterical. You're kind of caught constantly on this tightrope, and whatever you do, you're being restricted, you're being limited on how you want to live your life.
And I think that's the whole thing. It is that reclaiming freedom piece. It is about being sufficiently aware, but not being, to use your word, restricted by it. And you make a really good point about all of the sort of the natural conditioning, then the world, the way that it's our responsibility. And this was actually something in one of the conversations I had through the Together as Allies discussions that I do, and it was that. It's with a couple of guys who I know well, and there was this recognition about something that had happened at school, and that it was their 8-9-year-old daughter, and it would become something that the boys had become. It had been fun about pulling down the girls' skirts, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And the way that the message came out from the school was, it was the girls' responsibility to put on their, or what do you call it, the shorts underneath their skirt, and and what Matt was saying was like, actually, only in that context, I was suddenly realizing that's the safety work that's being put back, the responsibility back on the girls, rather than actually putting the responsibility on tackling, the boys, and actually having those conversations that it's not right to do that. But what puts people off doing that, though?
Yeah, I mean, it's a $1 million question, really. People, yeah, it's hard, and also not having the bigger conversation about like what. The problem with some of this stuff, particularly when it happens when girls are really young, is that this is all connected, right? It's all connected across a continuum. And so we think when they're 8 and 9, we're talking just about skirts, and we're giving girls essentially the message that you are responsible for stopping a boy pulling up your skirt. But as she gets older, she learns that there's connections between boys pulling up her skirts and other forms of sexual violence, all the way through to rape. Mm-hmm. And what she's learned is actually you are responsible for preventing this happening to you. And so if it happens to you, don't tell anybody, because it's your fault that it happened to you.
Yeah.
So if we as a society are actually really trying to increase rates of disclosure, hold more perpetrators accountable, and actually do something about the extent of sexual violence that we've got in this country, in the world.
Yeah.
It feels like there's such disconnected things, but they're not. They're so connected. And it's really important that we tackle really early on those very small messages that are, we use this concept. I'm based at a research unit called the Child and Women Abuse Studies Unit. And we use a concept there that was developed by my co-director, Professor Liz Kelly, of space for action. And so talking about, increasing girls' space for action. And decreasing some of the spaces that are available for perpetrators to perpetrate sexual violence and harassment. And what that kind of message does to that 8-9-year-old, it says to the girls, you need to decrease your space, you need to restrict yourself, restrict what you want to do. And there's no associated restriction on the messages that are going out to the boys who are actually doing this to the girls. And that just builds and builds and builds, and then we end up with the society that we have.
No, and and I can, and having had these conversations, and I do, it's one of the things that I am passionate about, is bringing men into the conversation so that they are made aware, and I said very much this whole thing around, you don't know what you don't know, and they're equally conditioned in some respects, and I think it's so important. So I'm conscious that there's lots and lots of things that we can talk about. But what's one big thing that you're hoping everybody's going to take away with on the Women's Voices Day?
My big thing really is about shifting the conversation from safety to thinking about women's freedom, because safety is just, for me, it is a precondition for freedom. It's the first step. It's not the goal. It's not that we shouldn't just be, all we want is for women to be safe. I want for women and girls to be free in the world, to live in the world in the way that they choose and that they want. And I think to do that, we need to have safety, but that's the first step. That shouldn't be our goal. And that's absolutely what I'm going to be kind of talking about and exploring on the day.
Fantastic. I'm super excited for you to join us on the 8th. Thank you ever so much for your time today, Fiona, and have a great afternoon.
Yeah, we'll do. You too. Bye. Thank you.